If you want to get better at pickleball, there's one strategy that 99% of players should be using, but almost nobody does. And that's because they're so focused on winning that they can't see why they're stuck and not getting any better. And yes, to adopt this strategy, you're gonna have to suffer the temporary pain of losing. Sometimes losing to players that you know you can beat. But if you stick to this strategy, I guarantee you that you'll improve so fast that you won't believe that you ever lost to the players that you're losing to today. In this video, we'll walk through what that strategy is, how it helps you improve super fast, and what you need to do to apply it. And the great thing is that any player at any level can use this strategy. But first, why is winning bad? If I'm winning, doesn't it mean I'm getting better? Let me tell you a story about a group of players I met when I first started playing pickleball. There was one player in the group that everybody sort of agreed was the best player. Let's call him Patrick. He had incredible drives, huge serve, and he had these crazy attacks that he could pull out from anywhere on the court. He basically never dropped or dinked, but he didn't have to. He was beating people with the tools that he had in his arsenal. After a couple of months, I outgrew that group, and it's been almost a year since I've seen or played with Patrick. But the other day, I went to the park and I saw him playing, and his game hasn't changed at all since almost a year ago. He probably wins 60 to 80% of the games that he plays, but he really hasn't gotten any better over the course of an entire year. And to understand why, here's a clip from famous tennis coach Patrick Mouratoglou, I don't know how to pronounce his name, on setting goals.
It's very important that your goals develop your style of tennis for the future.
This is so key. You need to be spending time on court in a way that develops your game for the future. And Patrick plays the game as if his future will be exactly the same as the present, which is why his present game is exactly the same as the past. Now, in contrast, there's another player I met around the same time. Let's call her Emily. Emily dropped every third and tried to get into long dinking rallies whenever she could. She would often get overpowered by Patrick, but she always stuck to her game plan. She knew that she needed to develop these fundamentals whether or not she was winning games against Patrick. And now she's playing pro tournaments. On any given day, Patrick is probably winning more games than Emily, but Patrick hasn't gotten any better and Emily's gone from a beginner to a pro. There was one big difference. Patrick was using a strategy to win today, and Emily was using a strategy to win tomorrow. And specifically, there's one strategy for winning tomorrow that I think everybody with aspirations to raise their game should adopt. And I call it the 5-0 fundamentals strategy. It's the foundation of high-level pickleball, something that serves you whether you're playing at 4-0 or you're Ben and Colin Johns. And I call it the 5-0 fundamentals strategy because by 5-0, you should have this mastered. And the great thing is this strategy couldn't be more simple. It only requires 5 abilities and can be summarized in 6 words. Get to the kitchen and dink. Getting to the kitchen and dinking is something that every advanced player must be able to do if they want to have a chance of winning games. But so many beginner and intermediate players choose not to try this strategy. Why? Because it doesn't usually pay off until later. They haven't mastered all the abilities to pull off this strategy very successfully. So they lose to players like Patrick and get discouraged. So, can you see how focusing too much on winning stunts your development? It doesn't matter whether you're beating Patrick today. So to get better faster, you need to choose this strategy, even if it means losing today. Because your future self needs it to even step on the court with the players that you want to play with. Okay, so are you bought in? Let's get into what the strategy really is. There are 5 abilities, and we'll walk through them point by point by looking at a recent PPA match. First, the serve and return. What you want to be able to do is hit a deep serve and a deep return. The deep serve sets up a weak return, which might make it easier for you to get to the kitchen. The deep return makes it harder for your opponent to hit a good third, which makes it harder for them to get in the kitchen. So in this example, Ben hits a short serve, Fed hits a short return, and then Ben gets an easy drop to get into the kitchen. In this example, Colin hits a good serve, Fed hits a deep return, and then because Fed hit a deep return, Colin hits a drop that bounces up high and Pablo is able to attack it. There was Pablo on the bottom right. And then in this one, Pablo hits a huge serve, deep. Colin hits a really deep return. And then because of that, Pablo can't hit that great of a third. He drives it from way back, which makes it harder for them to get into the kitchen. So that's the first ability in the 5-0 fundamental strategy, starting the point in neutral. If you're serving, you want to try to earn a weak return. And if you're returning, you want to earn a weak third. Next up is the third in the transition zone. So that's a bad example because Pablo misses his third. And in this clip, the commentators continue talking and they say some lines about how it's really important for Pablo and Federico to be making more thirds and fifths, and they're missing them. Here, Colin hits a really high third because Federico hit a deeper turn and Pablo is able to put it away. So that's not good. And then here's a good example. Good serve, deeper turn, drives it well, drops it in, and then has an opportunity to attack. They don't win the point, but they got to the kitchen. So that's the second ability, get to the kitchen. You need to hit thirds, fifths, and so on to set yourself up for a successful transition into the kitchen. There are a bunch of ways to do that, but the key thing is focusing on getting into the kitchen rather than trying to win the point from the transition zone. Next up is the fourth shot. And the goal here is to keep your opponents back. In that example, Federico tries to attack Colin's third, but hits it too high right into Ben, and Ben puts it away. So not a great choice on his fourth. Here, Pablo hits a decent drop, but it's going to bounce a little high, and then Ben can attack it and hit a winner. Pablo hits a drive to Ben. Ben clobbers it, making it difficult for Fed to hit a drop. He's behind the baseline, hitting a backhand drop. It ends up going high. It's not bad, but it's high and it bounces high, and Ben attacks it, winning the point. So that's the fourth shot. When you're serving, your goal is to get to the kitchen. When you're returning, your goal is to keep your opponent from getting to the kitchen. And so that's the third ability, keep your opponents back. Next up is the kitchen line. Here you need to dink consistently without missing a ball or popping it up. Not a ton to say here other than drill, 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 and drill. They're dinking, dinking, dinking. Oh, and Colin pops it up, trying to dink down the line, and Federico sees it, hits the Ernie. So that's an example of a pop-up for a dink that, and then in this one, this is a good example. So most likely, they're just gonna get to the kitchen and then just like hit a bunch of dinks back and forth. So that's the fourth ability, to be able to dink consistently once you do get to the kitchen. Finally, mistakes do happen, and when they do happen, you need to punish them. And there are two types of mistakes. One is your opponent hitting you an attackable ball, like that Ernie from a couple points ago, or your opponent attacking an unattackable ball. So in this example, Federico misses an easy sitter. You can't afford to do that. When you get an attackable ball, you need to convert on that opportunity. And then in this example, Ben gets a pop-up from Pablo and converts. He hits it down and keeps hitting it down until they win the point. When you get a pop-up, you need to punish it. In this clip, Ben tries to speed up from way too low, hitting it up, trying to surprise Pablo, and Pablo just hits it right back at him. Ben actually really doesn't hit that shot very often in men's doubles. Hits it a lot in mixed, but that's rare for him to try to pull that shot, and the reason is men with good hands are going to counter it and win the point. So when your opponent hits a bad speed up, you need to punish that as well. And so that's the final ability, to punish mistakes, whether they're pop-ups or bad attacks. And that's the whole strategy. Get to the kitchen and dink. Set up the third, get to the kitchen, keep them back, dink consistently, and then punish mistakes. So how do you develop these abilities? Well, for ability one, hit serves and returns. Don't be afraid of missing serves and returns in rec. Prioritize getting comfortable hitting them deep. Consistency will come with time and reps, but only if you're focusing on hitting them deep. For abilities 2 and 3, play transition games. Ideally, you're doing it with 3 people, with 2 people at the net and 1 person in the back. For abilities 4 and 5, play kitchen games. Ideally with 2 people on one side and 1 person on the other. And when you play rec games, commit to this strategy, because even if you can't execute it perfectly now, getting reps of hitting the right shots will lead to you mastering those shots. This really works. I can basically tell whether a new player is going to get good or not based on whether they're playing a strategy that's more like the 5-0 fundamentals strategy or just trying to win the game by any means necessary, usually by hitting the ball hard. The shot that players struggle with the most when trying to execute the strategy tends to be the third shot drop. So it's worth focusing really hard on that shot until it's a comfortable part of your arsenal. I put together 20 pro tips on how to hit consistent unattackable drops. And if you try out all of these tips, your drops are going to transform. Watch that video here.